if you don't have the system in place, find resources that can help you implement those systems. If you don't have your ducks in a row from an administrative standpoint, from a billing standpoint, from a training standpoint, it'll be a big problem for you.
We talk to a lot of BCBAs that are wanting to start their own thing. The issue I find is for a lot of these, newer BCBAs, they just want to start a business right now. They're like, oh, I just graduated. Let's go and do it. Why did you become a BCBA? Why didn't you become a business manager?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to ABA Business Leaders, brought to you by 3Pi Squared. I'm April.
I'm Steven.
And today with us, we have Brian Lopez from Jumpstart.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate you guys having me. We've had a little bit of time to check in, and I look forward to the conversation and sharing kind of a life's experience that cuts across a variety of professional activities to hopefully support some of the listeners in their growth and professional development.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we all got to, we just started our conversation before we pressed record and we were really diving in and really getting to getting into it. And then we're like, Steven's like, hold on a minute, we're wasting our content. We're like, oh, we're not recording. So today's conversation, we're really going to explore what it looks like to build systems that support the whole child rather than just treating behavior in isolation. And so that's kind of what's leading our conversation today. And then, us, we're just getting the conversation started. Yep. And Brian is one of us. We're just gonna have this conversation. Brian definitely has a different perspective, because, you did not start out as a BCBA. Tell us about your journey into the field.
Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. Greatly appreciate it. Yeah. So my background is in clinical psychology and started years and years and years ago. That sounds like a long time, but I put the number out there. It's like 25,
I know, right?
Years ago. Right? It's like, oh, that is many years ago. And really, I was involved in a lot of early diagnosis work in my clinical or in my PhD program. And at that time, an early diagnosis in the late 90s was kind of 7 and 8. And I was lucky enough to work with a team out of UCSD that was looking to push, as part of a larger study, to push the diagnosis down to age 2, which was pretty, to think at that point that you could diagnose autism that early was ground shaking. And so, my training started there, did some treatment in graduate school, some center-based treatment. Some of the Lopez stuff was transitioning down. We had some of the folks trained under the Lopez program come down and support. You had precision teaching, as huge was out there. And so at that point, that was really the conversation, was precision teaching, or I'm sorry, not precision, or PRT, the PRT group, pivotal response training, not precision teaching, pivotal response training versus discrete trial. And that was really the kind of the conversation. I always kind of moved over towards the pivotal response training. It really made sense to me. My early experience was, hey, here's a kiddo, jump in there and figure it out. We're doing treatment. You know behavioral theory. You've read all the articles, jump in there. And it was hard. It was really hard. And those experiences really stuck with me in terms of what it is that we could do in center-based as compared to being out there on your own and struggling. And someone with a lot of knowledge, what I thought of at that time was a lot of knowledge, which was almost nothing. Just enough knowledge to do harm is what, I wasn't even minimally competent. Right. And just over the years, really seeing that those two experiences weighing on me and really kind of driving some of the treatment that I wanted to see, or at least that I had in my mind as the ideal approach. And now, how do you make that happen in the real world? I think some of the issues really fall around what are the systems in place, not only in terms of what you do as a company, but also in terms of how do you make this work with CPT codes? How do you build a business while training, while, a lot of this is unreimbursed, or part of just the reimbursement. You have to calculate that. And you know what? I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financier. I'm a psychologist. And so one of those along the way, when I was in graduate school, there was like one BCBA in Southern California. It was just kind of coming up. And then as we start services in New Mexico, I'm leaving the School of Medicine to start my own practice. And one of the things I find out pretty quickly is that, they don't really care if you're a psychologist with a ton of training, and they care about a BCBA. And that's how they're going to bill. And that was kind of the initial piece of it. And it's like, oh my goodness. All right, well, now I got to go and get my BCBA. And so, and so I really do think of myself as a psychologist first, with a lot of understanding of behavioral principles and changing behavior. There are tons of people that understand behavior analysis even within our own practice. If there's a behavioral question, behavior modification, don't ask me. There's tons of people that have better understanding than I do. And so, I think it really is, as we built Jumpstart Autism Collective, it really has been about knowing my role, where I can excel to support those teams that are getting built, and really giving leeway to those exceptional people that can really fill those deficit areas that I have, to then produce something. Where we started, we're nowhere. Gosh, I can't even envision. And had you asked me back then, hey, do you think that this is possible? No way. That, and I think that's one of the pieces that I would really encourage a lot of the leaders, is to know that where you start or where you are today is not going to be where you are in a couple of weeks, couple of days. Yes, you may be experiencing similar trends, but the way you handle those trends, the way you handle those instances, vastly change from the experiences. And things do get easier. ABA business is really, really hard. Not only are you managing challenging, trying to provide an excellent service and support those learners, but you're managing parents, trying to support parents and everything that they're dealing with to then provide a better service to their children. You're managing training, you're managing adults and their learning differences to acquire skill sets that are sometimes different than how they were parented. And you have to train out how they were parented to really get good skill sets. And so, it has been a process to get there, and how we've gone about trying to build this. I didn't build our systems. I've been lucky enough to find people. My skill set is not organization. My skill set is kind of bigger thinking, addressing bigger issues, and then helping me figure out, hey, here's the, Stephen, here's the engineering that we need to put behind this, and here are the systems we need to develop to actually make this run and to make it work systematically. And people know what expectations you have of them, so that they can really achieve their best.
Yeah, when I was managing our ABA practice, it was like, how do I get out of your way, right? Like, how do I get out of your way so you can thrive, right? How do I remove the roadblocks and the barriers from you enjoying your work and being able to provide it, do it successfully, and then just let me get out of your way, right? Because I have no business telling you how to do your job. That's why you're here, right? And now, that also does take certain skills of the BCBA, right? And something that we often talk about is, I think the average BCBA right now is 2.5 years experience. So, there is that area of, I don't even know what I don't know. So having some self-awareness can be helpful, but then also having those experts in there that can see the gaps, even in your supervision team, right?
And I think, what's really challenging, and I think back to my early years, starting clinical service, I felt like I knew a lot, but I knew I didn't know enough. I knew, yes, I passed exams and I was licensed, but I was like, man, I don't know enough to be licensed. I'm going to go out and harm people. And I think, one of those early experiences defined things we did within Jumpstart. So really one of, kind of knowing that, and this might be, I don't want to make a too broad a generalization, but since I still feel like there's times, like even sitting here on this podcast, what business do I have speaking to a national audience about autism treatment and autism systems? Right. And I can think of a bunch of people in our company that would be much better at this. So I think, hey, if I'm still having these concerns about, people don't want to hear you, I imagine a lot of folks do. And I do think that there's a little bit of imposter syndrome, and sometimes that imposter syndrome can really take over. And so what we try to do is lift up a lot of our staff in ways that they know that they have support. Right. So if it's not only, through the field experience, but post-field experience, and ensuring that each of our clinical supervisors, which is basically, as soon as you get your BCBA past the minimum competent, both knowledge competencies and behavioral competencies, then you're supervising your own cases. Well, each supervisor then has a senior clinical supervisor that has a number, and again, this is where we should talk to Allie, our CEO, about what those exact standards for each position are. Mm-hmm. But thinking about our clinical supervisors, I think each of them have 5 to 7 years of experience to then supervise our entry-level clinical supervisors. Yeah. And part of that is because you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And there's such challenges. And, one of the things that I mentioned earlier before we were recording was that in 2016, Steinerhouse et al. Published an article looking at outcomes for individuals with autism. And they basically found that 47% of individuals with outcome have poor to very poor outcomes. Well, 2016 wasn't too long ago. I mean, yes, it's 10 years ago. Things have drastically changed, I hope. And so let's say that the research was actually done in 2014, took 2 years to get published. Not that long ago. And hopefully those numbers have changed a little bit. But what that number speaks to me about is that the treatment models that we had been implementing are missing something, because we aren't getting the outcomes that we really want to see. And I would actually, just given my training and what we do at Jumpstart as part of the challenges of addressing and building systems that really ensure we're addressing the whole child and kind of their specific needs, is that I think we're missing some of the medical pieces. That we know that 80% of individuals have a co-occurring behavioral health diagnosis. We know that 60% of individuals on the autism spectrum have 3 co-occurring, can minimally be diagnosed with 3 co-occurring behavioral health diagnoses. And then you start looking at medical, right? And I don't know the exact numbers on the medical, seizures, I think, 12% of our population. GI, and unfortunately, I just don't have those numbers right on top of my head, but it's pretty significant. And if you're providing ABA services to a neurodiverse population, I guarantee there's some pretty significant medical complications that are impacting your treatment outcomes. A lot of our young BCBAs don't have the experience to identify, they don't have the training nor experience to understand when a medical issue is impacting learning, which creates, in my opinion, and now this is again my training, creates a massive problem in that from a psychologist or even a BCBA perspective, if you're providing behavioral interventions for a known medical condition, that could be considered practicing out a work scope of work, right? Right. So ethical problem, minimally. Yeah. Well, but if you're treating and billing insurance for behavioral health services that will not make a difference to a medical condition, then that could, some insurances could consider that fraud.
Right.
It's a major issue. And unfortunately, the field has done nothing about it. And by the field, I don't mean, the board or anything like that. I mean, the field of behavior analysis, the profession of it. And how do we support a lot of young BCBAs or even businesses support BCBAs or to support the medical needs.
One of the things I talk about a lot, and that was important to me, and how I supported my staff when we had our own agency, was like even understanding the human development, and understanding the stages and the progression, and what that would look like, and even being able to look at your goals and saying, is this an appropriate goal? I can't tell you how many 100% compliance goals.
It's not reasonable.
The tantruming. Oh, the child will tantrum 0 out of 3 occasions across whatever. For a 2-year-old, I'm like, have you met a 2-year-old? Right. Yeah. And that's just looking at your traditional development, norms across the last decade, across the past decades.
Yes.
And not to mention you throwing in like the different medical, and that also brings us to like medical necessity and how well as a field do we really understand medical necessity and what that means. So all of these pieces and bringing them together, which each piece alone is a huge thing.
Yes.
But like, how do you remedy that? Like, how does a business owner right now who's like, oh shoot, I'm a BCBA. I started this business because I want to do better. I want to provide quality services. I want to fill in those gaps that maybe I didn't have in previous companies that I worked with. I am limited in my knowledge and what I know, but I do want to do better. I know, like, where do we go from here? What do we do?
Well, isn't that a great first step? Is kind of the acknowledgement and the awareness, and it doesn't matter what level you are. There's kind of those shit moments where you're like, well, I had no idea that this was a problem. An example of that. So probably, let's say of 2014, 13, 12, I don't know, somewhere in there, I had to do a prior authorization review with a psychiatrist around ABA. Well, they don't know anything about ABA. And they're going off of, they said, okay, so what's the medical necessity for this service? And I'm like, the what? what are you talking about? And he goes, you should be able to give me the medical necessity. And I'm like, Dr. So-and-so, I've never heard this term. I've been in the field. I've never heard this. What can you please outline what you mean by medical necessity? And he kind of went down some of the, what are the main symptoms? What medical, concerns do you have? What are the safety issues? And I was able to kind of answer those questions in that moment, but I left that medical review thinking, boy, I bombed that. Luckily we got what we had requested, but I left that meeting thinking, if I don't know this, our entire team doesn't know it. And so I did a deep dive into documentation of medical necessity for our team that we could include, and really showed some of the different levels to indicate, no treatment, focused treatment, or comprehensive treatment that we include in our treatment plans. That way reviewers can see, from ASD symptoms to medical concerns to adaptive behaviors to, self-interest, physical behavior, that it really equates over to the level of treatment that we're recommending. So now you're starting to talk about standardized questionnaires, and none of our staff had training on standardized questionnaires. And I'm kind of like, well, this is the fruit blood of what we talk about and how we communicate to our insurers and diagnoses, right? And we've got to convert what it is we do to terms and phrases that the insurance companies understand. They many times, now they're starting to get more BCBAs to help review, but we've got to talk in those terms. And so we had to do a lot of training of our BCBAs on standard scores and understanding what those standard scores are. That way they could really communicate effectively around those individuals' needs. And so each one of those steps, it's another opportunity. Again, where we started is nowhere where we are now. And I just kind of thinking about all the steps it takes. And I think it's, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yep.
And I've probably, gotten through, maybe it's little, do they have feet, paws? What do elephants have? I barely touched this whole elephant and kind of the ways that we've developed training for our BCBAs. And it really is a process. It isn't kind of a one and done. And there is, and luckily, thank goodness for 3 pi squared to help provide some of the administrative supports, some of the systems that have to be in place, for which a lot of our business owners have never been trained in, myself included. And, we even access some of 3 pi squares.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Materials. Yeah. So, and it's very helpful. And, so there are, and I guess maybe the lesson from that is if you don't have the system in place, find resources that can help you implement those systems. Especially now that we're starting to see more and more scrutiny provided to the field.
Yes.
And if you don't have your ducks in a row from an administrative standpoint, from a billing standpoint, from a training standpoint, it's a problem. Right. And it'll be a big problem for you and the industry.
I don't want to knock anybody, but we talk to a lot of BCBAs that are wanting to start their own thing, and a lot of non-clinician owned companies that want to start a business. And we kind of vet those people to make sure that we're all on the right page. They're doing it for the right reasons. They didn't see the TRICARE numbers and they're like, look at how profitable this is. But the issue I find is for a lot of these, newer BCBAs, they just want to start a business right now. They're like, I just graduated. Let's go and do it. And why did you become a BCBA? Why didn't you become a business manager, right? Because those are different things. And if you think that you can learn how to do a clinical role at the same time as building a practice, training staff, working with parents, I'm sorry, right? Not many people can do that, right? Very few can do that. And I want to say almost zero, right? And so doing that on a consistent...
Alone, right? Maybe a team of people that come together and start this.
Maybe, right?
In a perfect world, right? You have your clinical, you have your systems organizational, you have your business, maybe the trio with each having their expertise comes together. But even still, it does take a lot to learn.
I don't remember who told me this, but one of their issues with ABA in general was the surge in new BCBAs, and there's not enough experienced mentors to guide all of these new BCBAs. And then, they went on and they talked about how the, not every master's degree is equal, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is another issue when, you have a 30% pass, first pass. I mean, no offense to anyone that struggled with this exam. I couldn't pass it. I can tell you that. Yeah. But if it takes you 5 times, there's a sign that maybe you need a mentor, right? And I think that is part of the issue. Is that is it we built an industry without a framework? Is that what we're seeing?
The field of applied behavior analysis within autism has grown quickly, and you kind of fill the gaps and plug holes. From some of my experiences, some of my best lessons were learned on other people's nickel, meaning through employment. And I learned what it is that I wanted to do. I learned what it is that I would never do. But I think that idea of getting experience and learning, just like when you have multiple supervisors, you learn what you really like in a supervisor so you can emulate that, and you learn what you don't like in a supervisor or from supervision you've experienced, and you do everything not to replicate that. And those lessons are terrific life lessons. And I think when we start a business, and this is one of those kind of crazy things that I look back and I was like, boy, what were you thinking? Hey, I want to expand services. Hey, I have this great idea for what all, I can do, what we can do. And earlier I mentioned that when we started Jumpstart Autism in New Mexico, there was 2 other, maybe 3 other ABA providers in the state in 2008. I quickly realized that as I started the company, that I moved out of clinical service and into business management.
Yes.
For which, on the clinical service side, I had a lot of training. I actually pretty good. On the business administrative, Luckily, I had a mom that was willing to help me, that was an accountant and was managing my dad's pediatric practice. I had no experience. I had no business doing business. I had no idea about medical billing. There weren't a lot of systems for it. And so it's great to have aspirations, to be ambitious, to take what you've learned and apply that. But no one knows it all. And I think that's one of the critical pieces as a business owner, and finding those individuals that can really fill in those gaps for your knowledge, your skill set gaps. And everybody has them, and it's okay to have them. It's not finding those people that can fill it. So, earlier I mentioned that, I'm really a psychologist first and then BCBA second. And I should not be training BCBAs. I don't have that skill set. Mm-hmm. Well, within Jumpstart and within our internal field practice placements, we have a training system, or kind of a whole training department. That training department oversees, on average, each RBT gets about 140 hours of training before they sit with their own client by themselves. Yes, they're working directly with clients, but we have a trainer, kind of a higher level RBT that has been that probably has 3 to 4 years of experience already. That's training our staff. And we have knowledge-based testing that they have to pass, and skills-based testing that they have to pass. Again, this kind of goes back to that early conversation that no one wants to deliver bad ABA. No one wants to struggle in kind of, I don't know what to do. And so creating those opportunities for supervision, providing, from people that are really knowledgeable and can do that training, because I didn't have that. And that's what builds a terrific foundation to then build quality treatment and then fill the gaps.
Yes. And I could just sit here and listen to you talk all afternoon, because all of what you're saying, like what I'm hearing is that, like, support and trust and collaborating and working together, and that, like, just one person, one professional, one individual isn't going to be able to make the difference in the same way that a group of individuals, a group working together, a group of professionals who each have their own strength and knowledge base and understanding and experience levels. And, back earlier when you were talking about medical needs and, like, being able to rule out dual diagnoses or just other situations going on outside of just, the treatment of one behavior, and I had a question that I was going to bring up to you, but you've kind of answered that in how you guys are handling that with being able to have a psychologist on board, someone who is able to diagnose, and so that yearly diagnosis, that psych consult, yearly psych consult, and then as emergencies happen, because that was one thing I was going to say is, like, okay, we talk about you don't know what you don't know. So, if you're a BCBA providing treatment for a learner, and, maybe signs come up where they have an ear infection, a lot of times that's, especially if you've been around children, if you've been around children for any amount of years, even if you haven't been a BCBA for very long, there are certain symptoms, certain signs that can kind of lead to that. You say, oh, they're tugging on their ear, or they're hitting their ear, or, maybe they're not swallowing as much. Now, if you haven't had a lot of experience with a young child, you may not know. You may think, oh, there's a sense of, like, the self-injurious behavior is coming out of nowhere. Like, let's take data. Let's do a functional analysis. Let's figure out, are they escaping work? Are they whatever, and when really it could be something simple as an ear infection and they need antibiotics, and then, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But then I just want to say one more thing, but then, like, that's something that we kind of have a little bit of understanding of that. Mm-hmm. But then you add in these other major diagnoses and like dual diagnosis, like, how would I even know that, oh, maybe that's I'm just going to pull some random OCD or how, you know, or some other thing. And I'm treating it as like a very basic autism trait. Anyways. Yeah. So I love that you brought that all in.
Yeah, no. And I love the example and kind of that idea of OCD it makes me think of a couple of different examples of how working with psychologists improve outcomes. And so at Jumpstart, we have kind of 3 levels of programming. The early learner, we have a transition readiness, kind of going from the early learner to getting kiddos ready to enter kindergarten, or school services and being able to learn in group settings, things like that. And then we also have an intensive skills program where it's individuals with challenging behaviors, different acquisition rates, and typically a range of complex behaviors. And many of them are already diagnosed with profound autism. And so one of the things that comes up at every single one of these levels is this idea of maybe not the experience of, and we get it in consults all the time, the rule-bound behaviors just trigger everything, right? They want to play with their one toy and you remove that toy and they just melt down. And they can go on and on about different triggers. And it starts to look like OCD, right? Where they're hyper-focused on it. They can't shift. They check to make sure it's there. It's interfering with all learning opportunities. And so through that psych consult, we really do start talking about other coexisting conditions and how we can think about medical interventions to support. And how I frame it is it's a positive behavioral support, right? If we can find the right medication for a known condition that's impacting a learner's ability to acquire new skills and reduce that rule-bound perseverative behavior, which some medications can also reduce significant sensory processing differences. And we can just take the edge off. That way, if and there's different medications that can do that, for which after the consult, I'll call the PCP or I'll call the psychiatrist. And sometimes the child's on specific meds that's trying to reduce severe behavior. And I'll talk to the psychiatrist like, yeah, I get that this is designed to reduce challenging behavior, but that's not getting at the cause of it. Here's the cause, and here's the kind of medication we would look to have positive outcomes given the types of behaviors. And we just see astronomical changes when you help a child get their neurochemistry right so that they can then be at a place where they're ready to learn. I think that's kind of one example. You take sleep and trying to figure out sleep, right? That there can be neurological reasons why a child's not sleeping at night, and it just goes unidentified. And working with PCPs to get into neurologists to then talk with neurologists around some of the subtle differences and why we need a sleep study and identifying, hey, yeah, sleep's impacted, but here are the differences we're seeing in their learning profile. And I've even had a neurologist say, yeah, but that's autism. I'm like, and I can guarantee you, I've been in this field forever. I don't say this way, but hey, I've been in it forever. Listen to me. I'm the pro. No, I don't say it quite that way, but it's like, no, I can guarantee you that this is not an autism symptom. This is caused kind of from a neurological standpoint that we do not see in the population. And here's how it's impacting their learning, and go through the very specific changes of behavior that autism wouldn't count for. And as to why I'm saying, this is possibly a seizure, and so, we had a client, that was BAL trained, fully toilet trained, and started having accidents. And, someone said something to me in passing, and I was kind of like, oh, hey, let's get together and let's talk about this. And looked at all their data, and you could see across the data, the toileting voiding was the biggest issue, but you could see slight downturns in other kind of sequent or kind of along those same timestamps. And so then talking with mom and kind of, hey, I think that he's probably having some kind of seizure. She ended up she saw the seizure, took him to the hospital. Nothing happened. They couldn't find anything on on the EEG. And I kept on talking to mom and supporting mom. She was going through it. I mean, it was really challenging. And she was going through a divorce at the time. And she kept on trying to get her child seen by a neurologist. And so she had, probably 3 times over the next 18 months had him in the ER. And finally I said, hey, when the doctor shows up at your bedside, call me. I will answer, and I need to talk to that pediatrician or that hospitalist. And so kind of gave them the full background and told them what I thought needed to happen. And then the child's admitted, and I said, hey, when the neurologist shows up, call me. So had the conversation with the neurologist, and she said, we aren't seeing it, but I am hearing what you're saying, Brian. And yeah, let's start some prophylactic neuroleptics and anti-seizure, anti-convulsant medication and see what happens. Literally within a week, we see the same kid and he's accelerating, just night and day difference. And so that's one of those kind of pieces that we wouldn't expect even seasoned BCBAs, even parents that have, that are BCBAs to really understand. And that's where the interdisciplinary or the collaborative approach really makes a difference in improving these, the 47 to 50% of poor outcomes and changing that. That's what insurance is paying us to do. That's what Medicaid is paying us to do. And it's really, and as a provider, as an RBT, as a BCBA, it's frustrating not knowing why you're getting regressions, why you aren't making progress. Having those kind of outside eyes and considerations when you aren't in the weeds really can be helpful to make massive changes.
Yeah, I think that, and we talked about the imposter syndrome. I think that was all off the recording, but there is that. I have it pretty bad at times. I can imagine that there are a lot of BCBAs out there in the similar situation where they feel like I shouldn't be doing this anyway. I'm not going to ask anybody. And on some of those Facebook groups, when someone asks the question, it's why they're all anonymous now. Everybody's anonymous. There is some pretty, not so nice responses, I guess. Right. So like as a field, it does seem like some of those harsher voices are kind of coming to the top. And I don't know how helpful that is when, we need to be able to collaborate, right? We need different perspectives. And you have to be able to ask perceived stupid questions, right? Like I ask stupid questions all day long, right? Like that's the only way that I can learn. So if anybody knows a different way, I gladly take that, right? And I'll try it. But yeah, so I think that is something that, we could maybe do a little bit better as a field, is allow those questions and be open and vulnerable. I think.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I think the imposter comments were on the frame because I was sitting here thinking, yes, I feel that same way every time we hit record. Yes, there's a lot. There's so many pieces here too. So many different threads we can pull, and so so much here. But and that is like one of our main missions of this podcast, is to have the conversations, is to ask the questions, is to be curious, and even model that we don't know everything. Right? And I don't think a single guest that we have had on the podcast to discuss has even said, "Oh, I am the expert. I know it all." Yeah. Most of our guests pose questions too, right? And I do think that whether it's interdisciplinary, whether you have, even if you don't have a psychologist on board, which like after this conversation we've had so far, I'm thinking, wow, like we need to make changes here. We need to have more access to not only speech and PT and OT, because those are all other conversations that we could be having. Maybe there's a fine motor issue that could be, you just do this one little thing and tweak it, and voila, the outcomes are going to skyrocket, right? But even a group of BCBAs to be able to sit down and talk about have you thought about driving around the back door? I mean, it's not groundbreaking. But I think just that ability to be able to have that collaborative approach, even to reach out to the other business owner across town and say, hey, I've said this before, I've gotten scrutiny for it, but like, hey, you want to meet for a cup of coffee? Do you I would love to hear what's working for you and what's not working for you. And I want to share what's working with me and what's not working for me.
April, kind of the story along those lines. I've been in New Mexico for years, and a newer company had come in and started offering services. And we happened to be at the same conference, a local conference, and had booths kind of cat a corner from each other. And I had never met them before, and I had heard their name, and I just walked over and introduced myself. And, hey, I know you guys are new. We do diagnostic work. We're always looking for referrals. Happy to refer families over to you. And if there's anything that we can do to kind of support you in building a service here in New Mexico, happy to support. And from that one introduction, and just being willing to kind of have a conversation, over the years have developed an amazing relationship. And kind of every time one of the owners introduces me, she's like, Brian's one of the nicest people. The first time we ever met, we were struggling, and he walked up and just offered any assistance possible. And it's hard, this job. And if you're a small business owner in any profession, it's really hard. Clinical service is extremely hard because you have so much governance and so many regulations, and you don't know what you don't know. Kind of not only on the clinical side, but now on the business side and the contracts, there's a lot of legal jargon that you have to follow. And, you have to have an avenue to be able to ask that. So if it's, kind of like what Stephen mentioned, if it's one of the groups on social media, or it's finding a mentor, or if it's joining a professional association through your local ABA state association, or something like CASP, Council for Autism Service Providers. And I'll tell you, we joined CASP. I think it was in 2017, and we were going through. We had just opened up two clinics at the same time. One in a second clinic in Albuquerque, and a third clinic in Denver, where I am now. And it was a financial struggle. It was a challenge on all of our skill sets because we were training first. I mean, we had trained BCBA or some interns before, and at this point we have 12. We're training, and the amount of money it takes to train 12 people, it puts the entire system, kind of in stress. And the first time we attended CASP, I was like, wait, I'm not the only one experiencing this. Oh my gosh, here are my people. Here's people. And it's a place that you can ask questions. And they are, CASP was built around sharing information because it is hard. And, if you're looking for kind of a little more anonymous opportunity to get feedback and find support and find kind of a group, I'd recommend looking into CASP for sure as an opportunity.
Yeah, I think, we had an experience with our practice where, we didn't accept Medicaid at the time, and we were transferring a client to a Medicaid provider, and we were trying to transition out, and they didn't even want to talk to us, right? And it's like, it does such a disservice, right? You can say our treatment plan's terrible, but at least have a conversation with us, right? Yeah. And so I think that is something, again, it just goes to that, like, scarcity mindset. And there's enough, there's such a high demand for BCBAs right now.
We were just talking in our Ask Me Anything yesterday about waitlist. How do I manage my waitlist? Yeah. So that tells you something right there. Everyone has a very long waitlist that's years long. Yes. And so that right there tells us that there are enough people to go around that need our help and need, services.
Yeah. And you all are helpers, right? Help each other.
Exactly.
So
I love that.
And I have a question for you. I'm curious about, I knew I saw it somewhere and I looked it up. AI diagnosing. for autism?
So I think that, AI presents challenges in all areas, right? And if you go in blindly, it's a major problem. I think in some ways, if you look at AI from a distance and fear it, you're just going to get consumed and you won't understand. And ultimately, AI is there, should be there to be able to support work that you're doing. And so with that in mind, we do diagnostic work, and we were funded through a rural healthcare grant in New Mexico to expand autism screening and diagnosis into rural areas of New Mexico. And so we were able to hire psychologists from outside of the state, because New Mexico is not part of one of the compacts that allow psychologists to practice via telehealth into the state. So we hired psychologists outside of the state, licensed them in New Mexico. That way they can provide telehealth diagnostic services. Great model, works terrific. It has been a massive success in creating access of services, diagnostic services. And, in New Mexico has many rural areas. If you're in a rural area, it's going to take you 2 to 3 years longer to get a diagnosis just because of accessibility. And we found that families, even in metropolitan areas, are going to prefer a telehealth eval over a in-person eval. You contextually, you see the behaviors that you need to see diagnostically. It makes a massive difference. As a psychologist anymore, I much prefer a telehealth diagnosis than doing a telehealth eval than doing an in-person eval, because you see a different client in an office than you do at home.
Yeah.
And I think that's important also for treatment, but that's kind of a different piece. So the AI, so we have 13 psychologists working with us at Jumpstart to expand the services. And part of the thinking now is, hey, we have a limited resource of diagnostic work. What can AI do to support us? And over the last 2 years, trying to figure it out. And I was eventually approached by a group, and it might be the very group that you're talking about, Stephen, I don't know, about, hey, can AI work to support psychologists to remove some of the administrative responsibility? That way we can get the evals done quicker and make, that one psychologist more effective.
Yep.
And over a course of a year and talking with them, I finally agreed. I said, hey, you know what? And kind of initially I'm like, yeah, Jumpstart would be willing to collaborate with you guys and look at this. And they're like, no, we aren't interested in Jumpstart. We're interested in you supporting us.
I see.
I'm like, Not, I'm comfortable where I'm at. It's taken me years to kind of get where I have a system. And then 6 months later, I'm like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'll support you guys. And through telehealth, okay, hey, just simply using AI as voice to text and not even thinking about it then getting parsed out.
Right.
But once you can parse it into specific areas, right? So if we go through the medical history, it's talking about birth, it'll parse all the conversation into birth history, into, hearing, vision concerns, dental concerns, toileting, sleep, medical in terms of genetic history, if there's any, if it's, behavioral health history. And so it's all right there. I don't have to now go and type that.
About the clinicians who don't have as much experience, are there safeguards in place for things like this, or should we have safeguards in place so that they're not easily swayed, right? Because if they're being given specific information, that's where I'm the Amish guy riding my horse and buggy on the side of the road. I'm watching all the cars. Like you say, don't fear it. I'm fearing it, right? So and we use it. We're building with it, right? And I'm still like, man. I use it for my consults to take my notes for the same very reason, right? Yeah.
But my concern is, okay, you have all of applied behavior analysis at your fingertips.
Well, this is for diagnosis.
And even diagnosing, but this is where I go with it. And it applies to this too, right?
Planning.
Yes. And so you have a brand new BCBA that now has all they have to do is just type, what do I do for this? And they don't have that experience, right? And now we're giving them all of this. And my concern is that inexperienced people, rely on this more than they should. And so like that's kind of where I go with this. I don't know where this goes.
I have a story here that I want to get to, but I think the first piece to kind of realize, having a strong skepticism for everything AI produces is a solid approach. Yeah. And I think if you're going to do anything clinical, you have to vet on top of vet to make sure that any clinical information you're putting in is secure. So that you're using like a Bastion.com or Bastion GPT or something, that you aren't using the big LLMs.
Sure.
And they're vetting everything before it goes out to the LLMs and de-identifying and then pulling it back in. And I guess the big thing that I'd say is have skepticism about everything produced, because all LLMs do is provide best predictive next word. Right. That's all they're doing.
Yes.
It sounds great. And so just kind of, and again, I have a BCBA. This gives you a better idea of where my behavior analytics skills are. One of our good friends who's the director of training, was wanting to do a bark. They just moved to a new house and her dog's barking. And it's like, oh, well, when I'm in meetings, I just need him not to bark. And I'm thinking about a bark collar. And so I put into chat or whomever, what good bark collars are there? And chat comes back, that's a great question. And what you want to do for a bark collar is one that actually slowly increases, shocks over time. And I'm kind of, yeah, that sounds good. And my wife, who's our CEO, and the BCBA look at me and they're like, the hell are you talking about?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, you just kind of want to warn it. And, yeah, exactly. And my wife looks at me and she goes, do you not know anything about behavior analysis? I'm like, I know a little. What am I missing? You tell me what I'm missing.
Right.
And she's like, that doesn't work for punishment. I'm like, oh, duh. Right. And so that's a great example. And so then they put into the LLM, hey, what about this? And they're like, you are 100% correct.
That's yes. Yeah.
So, and I say this in all humility, right? I don't know everything. I probably could have had to answer that question correctly on the exam, but then deep sixed it, right? Whatever. But it gets to that idea of, hey, psychologist, 25 years of experience in the field of diagnosis and behavior modification, ask a simple, relevant question to an LLM, take it as, yeah, that makes sense. And if you don't have that skepticism, you're going to fall for it every time.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's just a great example of it is very easy. And whatever information you get, make sure it makes sense, because you're going to put it out there and it's going to represent the work you do. And all of a sudden it's going to get in front of people that know, and they'll be like, hey, this is AI slop, or you're incompetent. Yeah. Which one is it?
No, I don't know where I heard this, but there are a lot of court cases are now getting thrown out because lawyers are just 100% AI, and they're like, this doesn't even this court case doesn't exist. You're citing this as part of your case. It's not even a real thing, and so they're just throwing these cases out, and they're getting overwhelmed. The other, so when I put my tinfoil hat on, right, where I take this is you have a large practice management software that has incorporated AI into the support of treatment planning, diagnosing, whatever it may be. And you have maybe a BCBA uses a system, they vet it, it's 100% accurate, it's great, right? Perfect, everything's right. And then they rely on it, very similar to Tesla's whatever, what is it, cruise,
self-driving.
Yeah, self-driving thing. And then and then they get into a huge car accident because they're asleep at the wheel. You can't do that, right? And so are we the frog in the pot that we're gradually warming up to get used to it? And then, then this practice management software says, oh, you know what? We can recommend maybe 10% more treatment, and then, we also get the revenue on the billing side. That's, you know what I mean? So like, that's where I kind of go. And so this is my worry, right? Like, that's just my worry.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like crazy, but that's just where I'm at, right?
Yeah, I don't know that you should take your take the full tinfoil cap off, but maybe kind of adjust it just a little bit.
Sure,
right?
sure.
No, but I think that good skepticism is warranted, and the systems. If I'm not going to say if, as an AI owner, when you're using or allowing your staff to use AI, be sure you have a policy in place around the use of AI, and make sure that every staff member knows that the AI is an assistant. It's not replacing what we expect of you.
Right.
And never allowed to take the clinician or the clinical judgment out of the decisions being made. Right. It can support, but it's not there to replace. And in sometimes in the cut and paste world that we have around document development, it's easy to cut and paste and let it just kind of take the pathway of least resistance. What AI is going to do for us is you're going to be paid to review what AI generates and make sure it's accurate. That's where your big bucks are going to come in,
right?
And how it applies. And I don't know how close that is, but that's no different than what we do right now.
Sure.
Minus you have to type everything.
Sure.
And I think it's holding all of our staff accountable. It isn't about seeing more clients. It's about producing what's accurate and what leads to change, behavioral change for that learner and better outcomes. AI can get it right or get it wrong, just like the example I gave around the shock collar.
Yep.
And if you don't know, you're going to actually do harm.
Yes.
And I keep on kind of talking to my staff about, or my teams about it's a matter of time until and actually I think it happened with in Florida where Publix sued an ABA provider for not only overbilling them but not having the outcomes that they said they were getting.
Right.
And that's going to happen more and more, I think, where insurance companies are really trying to recoup significant money for poor outcomes.
Yes.
And so I think we just have to be on top of anything. If it's diagnostic work, I would definitely say the companies that I'm involved with are designed as the primary mission to support the clinician. Right. And not to replace. And so if you're trying to develop AI systems that replace, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I would fully put that tinfoil hat. I would have you make me a tinfoil hat. And I would get on that soapbox with you.
And like, I agree. It is that is the intended purpose. I hope, right? Like that has to be my hope. But I feel as though, and I'm sure you're well aware, there are some pretty awful companies out there that will use this as a productivity gaining machine, right? And so, I think you said this earlier, right? But you have these lines that you won't cross. Like you've thought about this in your vision. What will we not do? And that kind of brings me back to that. Like, how do you train your staff on building that moral compass inside? Like, because the ethics is great, right? But like you had to have some kind of internal navigation system that says, I won't do this, right? Like that's not what I'm willing to do. And I'm wondering how you build that into your system.
That is a terrific question. I guess my initial response is it isn't any one thing, it's everything that you do. It just kind of, no one's ever asked me that question. And it kind of gets it. I know you guys have talked about culture. I know and how important that is and how do you develop it. It's kind of the same thing. I think it really starts, it starts at the top and what that vision is and how where you invest to ensure that vision is being implemented. And so, for example, one of the driving goals initially for Jumpstart was to change a child's developmental trajectory. That's a massive goal, right? We aren't talking one-to-one learning for a child, for a child that's taking, 4 months to learn one skill. We're talking like a week to learn 3 new skills, right? It's exponential, ideally. And everybody has to be on the same page. And so the training has to be on point, and it really does kind of come down to you have to, the only word that's coming to mind that's the wrong word, indoctrinate everybody on the team in the same way of thinking and putting that client's learning first and foremost at every step of the way.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't necessarily make financial sense, how do you now make that one decision financial sense? There's tons of spin-offs that we can do as business owners that can help generate other revenue. As you guys have found out in terms of podcasting, potentially it's to support other pieces. There's Ford companies, they were starting to develop their cars. They had a massive side, kind of through the furnaces that they had to generate all the steel. They had a ton of just coal developed. Well, they then take that byproduct and start Stanford Coal. The charcoal business, right? So now they created their whole other industry. Well, it's kind of same thing that comes up with this in the practice or the services that you develop. Some of the stuff in terms of our training, the extensive training that we have, it's like, hey, let's start. It doesn't make sense for any one person, but as a system, it really starts to make sense. Now, how is it that these decisions we started with, from changing a child's developmental trajectory, all the different side things that we've had to do to accomplish that, how can we now think about those as supporting a larger community for educational purposes? Or what are those systems that we have that we can start training or offering as kind of a low-cost kind of monetary thing? I think very much like what you guys have done and saw a need and been able to fill it. It isn't any one thing that develops that ethical and clinical fiber to do the right thing in the moment. It's everything that you do as you train a staff. So if you're just offering 40 hours, what does that tell the staff? That tells the staff, just
training doesn't matter.
Whatever. Training doesn't matter.
Yep.
Right. And we've had BCBAs leave Jumpstart because they don't like, they feel the quality assurance verifications and the ongoing consultation supervision impacts their individuality in being able to develop treatment plans. I get it. At Jumpstart, here's how we do things, and here's how we collaborate, and this is what we do at Jumpstart. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, and that's fine.
Right.
Yeah, you can go on other places and kind of do whatever, and that's okay. But this is what we value.
Right.
And as long as, and I think that is, not to get too act based, but it is that idea of what is your value as a company and how are you living those values?
Right.
Another example. So 2 of our psychologists are going to do a training later this month with all of our BCBAs on motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing is something that came out of the substance abuse service model around understanding where someone is in kind of the process of change, of behavior change. And the reason we're doing this is to help our staff better understand where parents are in supporting their child, because we know that one of the biggest outcome indicators is having a parent engaged and being able to implement, to support their child in their everyday activities. And as our staff are more aware of how to assess some of that stuff, to be a better collaborator with parents, you get better outcomes. And, I know a little bit about motivational interviewing. I can't do a training on it, but one of our psychologists knows a lot about it. Yeah, let's do it. Nice. I love it. Yeah. And again, it isn't any one thing. It's everything that you do.
Yeah.
And everything in little steps, right? So if a supervisor says, I got to get this new new program implemented. Let me throw it into AI, or let me just copy what I did over at Johnny and not modify it. Okay, you're sending a message.
Yeah.
And it's everything that we do. And it's taking time. But also if as a business, we just say, hey, the brand new BCBA that just got her BCBA, her BCBA 2 days ago, can now carry a full caseload, just like my seasoned BCBA. You know what? That's sending a message. And that message is, it doesn't matter what the outcomes are. It matters that we're making money.
Yeah.
Your professional development doesn't matter to me. What matters to me as my employee is that you're making money.
Yes.
And so if as an employer, I can say, hey, your professional development is just as valuable to me as our clients' outcomes, and they serve the same purpose, right? It's the money I invest in you and improves our clients' outcomes, which lifts, jumpstarts branding or awareness in the community. It's a win-win. It's a long-term win, and not just playing the short-term gains.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that conversation you had with the family, right? We broke your trust. I think that is where this comes from, right? Your values are embedded in this company. And I think if you have a lack of value or a lack of intention or a lack of vision, that will show, right? And I think that is what's missing from a lot of well-meaning ABA businesses.
Kind of if we get back to systems, and what systems do you have in place? I think that having that vision, and maybe not, but what are the values that you're trying to implement through the practice that you're working at, or the practice that you're developing as a small business owner? What are those guiding values? Those values will dictate the systems that you have to implement. Now, you aren't going to know every system that you're going to need, and once those facts kind of come about, or you hear what someone else is doing and try to replicate, then replicate that to how it matches your values. You aren't going to necessarily be able to cut and paste everything that someone else is doing. You can do a lot, absolutely. It might be able to get you 80% there.
Sure. But
that extra 20% is the individualization for the value you have for your company, or as a employee at an ABA program, what you're implementing is matching the value for that company, that then actually is the beacon for younger BCBAs to replicate, for the RBTs to aspire to become future BCBAs. And it really makes a difference, and it's not aspirational. But what I'm saying is not aspirational at all. It's people get into this field to make a difference.
Yes.
They want to grasp onto your values that are making a difference, and they want to live them. Help them live them by creating the systems to really make that difference. Yeah. What I just said, we have to run that through the filter of adult learners, of different life experiences, and different, people just see the same thing and experience it a little bit differently and have different interpretations. And so it's messy. It's hard. It's a challenge. This is not, developing and running a company. It is extremely challenging at every level. But if you can fall back on those values and use that as your beacon, and it makes it sustainable, right? It's not forever. But part of that is just my own personal story. Is after COVID, we trained 12 interns to become BCBAs, and that was a huge financial burden. And we finished that process kind of right as COVID was starting. Then you have this monster financial burden, and now you're building out of it. And in Denver, we had our center in Denver, and our lease was up in 2003, and we started running numbers, and we were looking at kind of expanding. And as we were running numbers, it's like, it doesn't matter how many kids we serve, our model's not going to work here.
Right.
And it was a hard decision to say, hey, we're going to have to close our center. We weren't willing to move to a home base. And so we looked at actually selling our Denver operations, went through that process with some great consultants that we still stay in touch with to help us kind of continue to refine our systems. And after we ended up closing, which was a big deal. We ended up terminating, stopping service for, I think, 50 kids. We ended up having to terminate about 70 staff. One of them was my son that was finding his stride within behavior analysis. One of them was my cousin. It was heartbreaking. And at that point, I told our wife and my wife then and now CEO, I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I can't. This is too brutal. And we were able to shift my role from CEO back into clinical psych to support our teams even more, and thriving within that, and kind of got me back to the clinical service that I was trained to do, that I had stopped doing for years. And it's just, and so I think along the lines, we do, as leaders of a business and as leaders in an industry, you can go down paths that you say, hey, for me, this is now a dead end.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing just now what you shared, because it helps to normalize, right? Because we started this year, at the beginning of the year, we started a support group for BCBA business owners, completely free, no charge. It's just you go on to the link will be in the show notes actually, if anyone's interested. But that is, as we're growing that, and as more and more people are joining, and we have meetings monthly, and then we support each other through the Discord platform, throughout the month. That's been the biggest feedback I think that I've received in that community is, wow, I don't feel alone, right? And I'm not the only one. And maybe I'm not doing anything wrong. This is just a challenge that's before us, right? And then also building that community of reaching out to ask for help from each other, or, and I think it's really, it's a beautiful thing that when professionals, especially professionals in the helping field, can come together and help each other.
No, absolutely. Well, and kind of on a similar note, we are looking to expand some business to business opportunities for Psych to support ABA companies. It's not only from an autism, kind of to potentially offer kind of a white glove autism screening and diagnosis, where you don't have to hire a psychologist. Psychologists are a squirrely bunch. I just put it out there. Not all just like, kind of any profession, not all psychs are created equal, and nor are, that herding cats, right? And it's hard.
Right. And we all have our quirks.
No, absolutely. And it can be hard to manage, especially to try to incorporate psychologist diagnostics consultation into a practice. And so if folks are interested, my email will be in the show notes. Reach out to me. Happy to have those conversations and what those look like, and what that, where we've had success. One of the challenges with diagnostic work is really, or just autism services, is how do you penetrate the referral field? And through diagnostic work, that's one of the easiest ways to generate referrals for that company. And so, it's not that when you do an eval, and evals that we've done all over with other providers, it's like, hey, we'll talk to the family about your company, but they have the option to go anywhere, first and foremost.
Right.
And as long as we're clear on that, then good, provide this. And so really helping companies address the medical needs of their clients is what our goal is, but also being able to help companies, if they chose to implement or offer diagnostic services, to do it in an ethical way that really not only supports their business, but for referral, but also supports the community and brings value in so many different ways, that people are welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk with what that would look like.
Great. Absolutely. We can provide your information on the show notes for sure. Well, as much as I want to continue this conversation, and we will actually be continuing the conversation, we have arranged at least one more, maybe even more conversations with Brian, and so we're really looking forward to that. And Brian, we thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for all of your story and your wisdom that you've shared with us today. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. And, to have a platform and to support co-owners, to support those that are in the field to continue to deliver best services possible and meet your own personal goals through value-based kind of life. And, it's a hard profession, but people are out there that want to support you to do the best you can.
Yes. Yeah.
Find your tribe, for which I think 3 Pi Squared is part of that tribe to help you do better.
Oh, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Everyone who is listening, we appreciate your time and we appreciate you joining us. And if you want to reach out to Brian, his information will be in the show notes. The support group will be in the show notes. And yeah, we would also love to hear what you have to say. And if you have any questions about today's episode, we would love for you to call the hotline and leave your question, leave your story, leave any information that you have for us about the podcast, good or bad. We'll take it all. All right. Well, thank you everyone for today, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.